Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our inaugural broadcast, No Limits. And when I say no limits, that's exactly what it is. And I am proud to be joined in our initial broadcast by Mel Farr Jr. and David Levin. Guys, somebody had to be the first. It might as well be both of you.
Glad to be here tonight.
To be a part of it.
It's really neat. You know, when we came up with this idea, we wanted to make sure that we can go out there and talk about anything we want, not limit ourselves to sports. And I can rest assured that this broadcast is going to accomplish that and then some. So there's no better way to start it, unfortunately, with some of the events that have occurred over the last 8 days regarding racial tensions relating to the tragedy of George Floyd as we pay tribute to him. So, Mel, why don't you give me some of your initial thoughts on it, and then we'll break down some of the particulars.
Well, initially, obviously, when you look at it, you're appalled. Trying to figure out, what's in this guy's head. Why wouldn't he get off of him? And then after you get over the initial shock, then I go back and I say, man, back in 2016, somebody was trying to tell America about this problem that existed with police using extreme force in the minority communities against African Americans, and nobody wanted to listen. People wanted to act like it didn't happen. Now, we've had a number of things that have happened since then, but I guess because this was so much in your face that people just they couldn't ignore it because it was so blatant. Looking at that guy's expression as people are filming him and telling him, "You're killing this man. Get off of him." And he's begging for breath, saying, "I can't breathe," calling out his mother's name, who passed away 2 years ago, and he's just sitting there nonchalantly as if he knows, because the cameras are rolling, as if he knows when this is all said and done, I'm going to be all right. I'll be good. I'll be straight. I think it was because the raw audacity of this guy to be so arrogant in what he was doing and believing that he was right in what he was doing. I think that's what really put people over the edge to say, you know what, there's a problem here. But a guy tried to tell us about this problem 4 years ago, and nobody wanted to listen. They wanted to ostracize the guy, say he was anti-American, called him a communist, all kind of names, cost him his livelihood. For doing the exact same thing that this guy did, kneeling on the football field, and this guy's kneeling on this man's neck and caused him to die. And now, like I was telling you yesterday, we can probably get into it yesterday, the NFL had a chance to get in front of this deal, and they chose not to. They had a chance to be on the right side of history with this, but they chose not to.
Yeah, indeed they did. Let's go over some of the things that took place, and then, David, you can go ahead and get involved. We're talking about, obviously, Derek Chauvin, leaning on George Floyd's neck, and anytime you lean on it for up to 8-9 seconds, and he minutes. I had a few of my digits wrong, but minutes, okay, then there's no question that his neck got broken, circulation, and the rest goes on and on. So, yeah, it was definitely a problem. And to think that Derek Chauvin had 18 complaints ahead of him is really, really, why is he even out there to begin with? Goes beyond my imagination. Go ahead, David.
Okay, well, thank you, guys. First of all, this is I'm really excited about the fact that we are starting something new tonight. The topic is something that we need to discuss, and it couldn't come at a better time. Mel, I was listening to what you had to say about the audacity of the situation, and I can't say that I understand everything that goes on as far as racism. As I was telling Scott last night, and really it doesn't compare. I'm a white Jewish male who's in his, maybe close to 50, and I've dealt with situations before because of my religion. I don't think I could ever identify with anything that has dealt with racism in the past. What we did last night was we picked apart the situation and the problem that exists with not enough understanding that this has been a situation that's been going on for years. And maybe, as we talked about it, Colin Kaepernick was ahead of his time because he was telling us of these problems, that he was right. And we haven't heard from Colin Kaepernick yet. I don't know whether we're going to hear from him about this. But this is a situation now that has blown up probably more than we expected it to. The man deliberately did something to harm another individual. And regardless of the situation, whether a crime was committed or not, and I don't know all the details about that. All I know is I've heard maybe a counterfeit check or whatever. There's a problem there. And hopefully this still becomes a voice where people really do open their eyes and say, okay, we have a problem here that we have to solve. I don't know how else to talk about it that way. And maybe a discussion of tonight will help me further understand, what we need to do. I've always believed that you sit and you listen first and you react. This was a react and then you worried about it later situation. It's a really sad time for our country. It's a really sad time for race relations. And I'm hoping that, if anything, that we're able to sit down at this point, people just talk and communicate first before we further dive into something like this.
Well said.
And I appreciate what you're saying, David. And I grew up around a lot of Jewish people, and
Mm-hmm.
Jewish people have never been a problem for me, to be honest with you, because they dealt with, they have things, that they had to deal with in their past, with what went on, with what went on in Germany. So you do have a better understanding of being persecuted just because you're different. You have that understanding, but ours is a little bit more deep rooted. I mean, people have acknowledged it and have said that it was wrong. The thing that that hasn't happened here in this country is an acknowledgement of people saying that was wrong. What happened? 401 years ago when this whole thing started, it was wrong, and people say that our criminal system is broken. Our criminal justice system is broken. It's not broken. It's working exactly the way that those people designed for it to work. So the criminal justice system doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be started all over again, and it needs to be taken down and built up totally again, where it's actually just for everybody. Everybody can achieve equal justice, because it's not the way it's broken right now. Like I said, it's not broken. It's working exactly the way it was intended to work.
To think that Chauvin would actually be on a guy for 8 to 9 minutes, that's just unbelievable, really. And we'll get to the other cops, but 8 to 9 minutes is a lot. And let alone the fact that, like you said, everything was on film and on camera. I mean, geez, oh, Pete's. I know the legal system has to play itself out, but the visual evidence is what it really is. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Racism, like I told you yesterday, Scott, racism in America is not getting worse. It's just getting filmed, and that's what Will Smith said.
Right.
This has been going on forever. This has been going on forever. Since they freed us, they've just found a different way in which to enslave us and to still get that free labor from us, and that's the criminal justice system. Yeah. That's the way it was designed. And so, you look at this act here, and as horrendous as it is, because that is the extreme, without question, is when you take a man's life. But in between that is the harassment, the constant harassment. I mean, I can tell you from my personal experiences from when I was in college. When I lived in Detroit, because my dad was who he was, if I had an interaction with the police, and once I pulled out my driver's license, they have a whole different posture. Well, when I went to California and nobody really knew who my dad was, it was a whole different situation out there. I mean, just getting pulled over for nothing. I was telling this to my daughter the other day about my experiences with law enforcement. I'm probably 18, 19 years old in California. I'm driving a brand new car. I get pulled over first thing he does is tell me to get out the car. Puts the handcuffs on me and tells me to sit on the curb. And the question he asked me is, how can you afford this car?
Really?
That's the question. That's the question they asked me. Being a smart aleck that I am, knowing the answer that he was looking for, I said, because my dad's a dealer. Well, his eyes got all big. I said, man, he's a car dealer.
Wow.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
And they let me go. Yeah. One time, I'm literally probably 30 yards from my house, from my apartment. I'm coming out of the 7-Eleven. I'm not even in my car. I'm coming out of the 7-Eleven. Police officers are sitting on my car, leaning on it. And I come out, is this your car? Yeah, it is. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. I'm not even doing anything. Same question. How can you afford this car? Give them the same answer, because I'm a smart aleck. They give me the same look. I give them the same answer once again. He's a car dealer. Then they let me go. I'm just coming out of 7-Eleven. I got a big gulp in one hand and whatever else in the other hand. I'm not doing anything. I just stopped there on my way home. I'm 30 yards. I'm across the street from my apartment complex. Not bothering anything, not breaking any law whatsoever. So those are the kind of things that we talk about, just from the harassment to obviously, what happened to Mr. Floyd. There's a lot of things that happen in between. So as African Americans, we're uneasy anytime we get pulled over because we don't know what's going to happen, what the end result is going to be. So, I was always taught, when the lights flash, make sure you go to somewhere that's well lit. Do not stop on any back street or on the highway or anything like that. You drive all the way somewhere to someplace, a gas station, a shopping center, someplace where there's some people, they can see what's going on, and it is well lit.
That's a lesson everybody should learn there.
Put your hands up on the steering wheel. Ask permission to do everything. Let the officer know exactly what it is that you're doing. Sir, I'm going into my back pocket to reach for my wallet.
Right.
Is that okay? And then you err on the extreme side of caution when we deal with law enforcement. Just so they don't, because they already perceive us as a threat. That's the problem.
Right.
They're already perceiving us as a threat. So to try to de-escalate things from the beginning, try to make them feel as comfortable as possible so you get that itchy trigger finger.
Great.
Well, let me lighten this thing up a little bit while I have a chance to do it, okay, Mel? And we joked around about it yesterday. I had that embarrassing ticket with my girlfriend in Detroit because I was doing one-arm driving, and ironically, okay, it was an African-American police officer that pulled me over. I was just trying to acknowledge him and be polite, but I guess that wasn't the time to do it on Telegraph Road. You know Telegraph Road, right, Mel, as you head toward Detroit?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's not the place to be putting your arm around your girlfriend, is it?
Well, I was always taught to drive a 10 and 2, but I had a stick shift, though, too, so I always had one hand on the steering wheel. Yeah,
well, I didn't have a stick shift. The only time I ever learned how to drive a stick shift is when I rented a U-Haul from Tampa all the way to Detroit, and I had over 1,250 miles to practice on their vehicle. But, yeah, my girlfriend felt bad about it. It was just a gesture where, I thought it was a warm gesture. She did. She felt bad. But meanwhile, the police officer probably made his quota, got me, and I guarantee you, I never went out there and made such a stupid move to leave myself obvious to be criticized by the Detroit Police Department. But, again, it's just an isolated situation. If I'm going to get a ticket, I might as well get it much better than that and get my money's worth off of the fine. But, yeah, you're right. There's always an apprehension whether you're on the other side of the racial boundary as to how they'll react. And I completely relate to what you're going through, is all I'm saying. Totally get it. So, David, go ahead.
I'm listening to what both of you are saying, and then I'm sitting here kind of with my, my mouth wide open listening to things that people experience. I haven't had that experience before. I have had, dust-ups with police officers where you've been stopped and whatnot, and You do. You're right. Mel, you're as nice as you can be because you don't know what's going to happen. I'm a 5'7", 170-pound little runt, and this is a big guy with a gun on his side and flashing a light in my face. I can only imagine, growing up and being taught those things and then seeing it come to real life, what it can be. What are we learning now? I'm going to change the topic just a little bit. What are we learning now from the way we are watching this unfold with people protesting, and whether it's the silent protests that seem to be working, where they're asking police officers to march with them, to those that are a little more aggressive in the way that they're doing things, and the people that are harming other innocent victims who are just bystanders in the whole situation. What is this telling us about our America today?
Well, first of all, people get upset about the rioting and the looting, and I understand. I'm not for that. I'm not for violent protests. I'm for peaceful protesting, because I think the message gets lost when you have to deal with all that violence, because in the media is just focused on the rioting and the looting, and that's all they're talking about is the rioting and looting. But the vast majority of the people are out there peacefully protesting. There was some individuals out there that took advantage of the opportunity and went out there and they did some rioting and looting to make the peaceful protesters look bad and try to get the message lost. So I don't want to focus on that too much, but understand this, though, that this country was founded by protest. The original protest was the Boston Tea Party, and that wasn't a peaceful protest. It wasn't a tea party. They didn't sit down and drink tea. They dumped tea in the harbor because they didn't want taxation without representation. And what did England value? They valued that tea, because that's what they're putting taxes on. They say, hey, we don't believe in that. And so that's how this country was founded. Any progress that we've made in this country was because people protested. Dr. King peacefully protested, and he did it for a reason, because number one, he knew he couldn't win, but at the same time, he was hoping that the American people, when they turned on the TV at 6 o'clock in the evening, because we didn't have 24-hour news cycles like they do now, you didn't get alerts on your phone where you could see what was going on instantaneously around the world. But when people sat down at dinner time and they saw those images of what was going on in Montgomery, Alabama, in Atlanta, Georgia, in Birmingham, Alabama, when they were peacefully protesting, their suit and ties and hats and all that kind of stuff, dressed to the nine, and they're getting beaten. They're have the dogs sicked on them. They're having water hoses sprayed on them. And I'm talking about they're marching with their kids out there, and all these things are happening. And people got appalled when they saw that image. That's the only way we were able to get the Civil Rights Act. That's the only way it ever happened. It ever happened. So I think what we're learning now is that people are tired, especially African Americans. I mean, we've been telling you about this, and you haven't listened to it. So, Dr. King said that riots are the language of the unheard. So we've been talking about it. Cap tried to tell everybody about this 4 years ago. Nobody would listen to him. They thought he was crazy. They ostracized him, took away his livelihood from him, called him anti-American, said that he was a communist. Nothing positive about this guy whatsoever. The guy became like a leopard in the NFL. Can't get a job. So when you've tried everything, and when you've had this frustration built up in you, and you see all these things going on throughout the country, whether it's Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland, was the girl in Louisville, the guy out there in New York that said he couldn't breathe, Trayvon Martin, on and on and on and on and on. The names, when you've tried everything and people still don't hear you, what else do you have left? You have to do something to get the attention. Now, this country values buildings more than black lives. You can replace a building. These buildings have, for the most part, they have insurance. They can be rebuilt. But we can't replace George Floyd. He's got one life, and it was taken. It was snuffed out. Go ahead.
I got to tell you a story. Trayvon Martin. I'm haunted by that, and I'm haunted by the atrocities that go on in the state of Florida. Nobody. I don't know how to say this properly, because I don't want to sound offensive and sound ignorant at the same time. So please forgive me. There was a time when people just turned a blind eye to everything. And I was born I wasn't born in the 1960s. I was born in the early 1970s. And I can remember being a child and sitting in front of the television, because we only had the three channels. And, Walter Cronkite was talking about the atrocities that were going on in America. And I didn't understand it as a child. And as I got older, I lived in a community where there were many colors and many religions and many, beliefs and whatnot. And we were all just one person. I didn't fully understand it. Maybe that's my ignorance. And maybe that's my saving grace, that I've always treated people the same way. Because of the way the media is today, and we're partially responsible for this, and I admit that. I know sports media is different than national media. But the media is responsible for it. The technology is responsible for it, because everybody has a cell phone in their hand, and they would rather take a video of something like we saw with Floyd than try and prevent it, because we would rather be, the guy that was there first, that got the first news story.
Well, let me just interrupt right there. I mean, if those black individuals would have interrupted those police officers, what do you think would have happened?
No, I know what would happen to them. They would have either been shot or arrested or detained or brutalized as well. I'm not stating that they should have or not, but I'm talking about in general, because you see fights all the time where people are pulling, video cameras out, pulling the cell phones out because they got to watch what's going on. I'm not trying to make any kind of light of the situation. It's a problem that keeps on escalating, because they're not focusing on the proper ways that we are protesting, like you talked about. We're talking about the rioting and the damage and the things that are negative about what's going on. And I don't know how that gets fixed, because as long as technology is there and it gets more advanced, it's gonna paint a different kind of picture than what should be painted, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, people, it's just like Cap, they wanted to talk about the effect and not the cause.
Right.
We got to talk about the cause. The root problem, there wouldn't have been an effect. There wouldn't have been a reaction if there was no action. And because of that action, there was a subsequent reaction to the action. And right or wrong, however you feel about it, whichever side you feel about, how you feel about rioting, like I said, I'm not one, I don't agree with burning down buildings, looting stores, and all that other stuff. But I understand. And that's the thing that I think the point that people have to get to is understanding. And it's difficult to do that when you haven't had to deal with all these things in the past, and you haven't been having this conversation for all these years. I mean, this conversation just didn't come up. We had the same problem, 92 when Rodney King, when that verdict came out, people were obviously upset about that whole verdict. And we had a video. That was one of the first times that you could see what people were talking about in the state of California with how they were being policed. And this guy was getting pummeled, and those guys got off. The juries acquitted him out there in Simi Valley. Now, there's a federal case that 2 out of the 3 officers did some jail time, but as far as on the state side, they got no time. So these guys feel like they're 6 foot tall and bulletproof, and they can do whatever they want, and they're going to get off with it. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about, because every time something happens, they get off. Even the guys up there in New York, I can't remember the guy's name, but the first one that said, "I can't breathe." None of those guys. I don't think they were charged.
Well,
I think the guy was in Baltimore, in the back of that van. His neck was broken back there. His spine was severed in the back of a transport vehicle.
Right.
They brought charges against them, but they're all acquitted.
Wow.
How does that happen? in this country, in this day and age, because that's the way the system is designed. They don't care about black men in this country, black people in this country, because you got Sandra Bland down there in I think it was Texas. No, it wasn't Texas. Alabama, I believe it was. That died, or Louisiana, I believe, that died in prison. So I mean, so what? After people, I mean, it's like you have a everybody probably loves pets, and if you beat a dog long enough, eventually he's going to turn on you. That same dog will turn on you. And if it doesn't turn on you and you get fed up with the dog and you take the dog to the pound and somebody else gets that dog, he's going to turn on the new owners.
Right.
And I'm not equating us to animals. I'm just saying that eventually you get fed up.
Yeah.
You just can't take anymore.
Were you guys
and people just saw that and they just couldn't take anymore.
Were you guys referring to Eric Garner?
Yeah, Eric Garner.
Right, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. I knew you.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, let me ask you a couple of other things, if I may. All right. I know we've touched on it, and then I want to get to some other important things. Obviously, we can all of us agree that Colin Kaepernick was ahead of his time kneeling, correct? I think he was.
Well, I mean, I don't say he was ahead of his time. He was just, he was passionate about something and he wanted to bring attention to it.
Right.
And he used his platform in which to do it. And, as I was telling you, the NFL had a real opportunity to get in front of this deal.
Oh, yeah.
And be on the side of right. But because they value profits more than lives,
right,
they chose their profits. And so they chose to distance themselves as much as possible from Colin Kaepernick, because the media turned this thing around and some other people turned this thing around and made it about the flag, and it was never about the flag. Colin never said anything about the flag. As a matter of fact, he made sure that he was respectful of the flag. He had the guy who was in the military, because at first he was sitting down on the bench. And the guy said, no, don't do that. If you're going to do it this way. And the guy came out there with him, put his hand on his shoulder while Colin took a knee. The guy who was in the military said, this is the most respectful thing that you can do. This is what we do when our fallen soldiers come back home. We get on a knee. So this was the most respectful thing that he could do. I can't remember that guy's name either.
Well,
originally he was sitting down. He wasn't even standing for it.
Was it Eric Reed?
No, it was no. Hang on.
Okay, well, let me go over a couple of other things, if I may. Okay, obviously, I know where you're coming from. I think, and this is just a personal opinion, Mel, he was ahead of his time, but the NFL is all based on bottom line. And if they thought that they were going to 20% hit in their pockets, then you have a problem, and owners only think one way, the bottom line. I guess we can all agree on that, which is more or less making your point, isn't it, Mel? It's all profit. Yeah, it's all about profit.
Guys,
yeah.
Nate Boyer. Nate Boyer is the Green Beret who had the conversation with Colin.
Okay, good.
Right.
So let's go to the Minnesota situation, okay? We talk about George Floyd and Derek Chauvin putting his full weight on there, subsequently broke his neck. And, of course, we know that the charges. I'm going to go over the charges again and update everybody out here in case you don't know. The new charges, the charges for Derek Chauvin is third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, and the third one is unintentional second-degree murder, which gives him a maximum of 40 years. So now he has 3 of them. The other 3 cops have second-degree abetting murder. All could face 40 years. Well, again, the charges, like you said earlier in pre-production, Mel, are just part of it. Now it's just a matter of proving that they stand up and these guys are going to face a slammer. So how do you like the way things are actually being played out? I think they had a new attorney general overlook it, and they didn't want to go ahead and come to a quicker decision on what to do now that they've got their feet wet in it. Are these fair, acceptable charges? And do you think the
charges are acceptable, but that's not even half the battle here. Well,
right.
I mean, I guess it's probably half the battle because there's some other cases where guys weren't charged at all.
Right.
But the biggest thing is going to be trying to get convictions. That's going to be the biggest thing. You got to convince 12 juries unanimously that these 4 white men, and I think there's a couple other guys, that you have to convince a jury that these guys are guilty of this crime that everybody saw on TV.
Right.
Right.
To the letter of the law. Everybody saw on their smartphone or on TV to the letter of the law. And we know from history that these are very, very difficult. So our hopes aren't up. I mean, we hope, but we're not expecting it. We have to manage our expectations in this particular type of situation and just kind of play it by ear, because we definitely don't want to get overly excited. But I can tell you this.
What's that?
I can tell you this. If these cops do not get convicted, and you guys think that this was bad, or you think what happened with Rodney King was bad,
I was going to ask you that question. I was going to ask you that question.
It's going to be on fire.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be on fire.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, David.
I was going to ask that question. This is blatant as blatant could be. And I'm sure we all 3 agree with this. This is as blatant could be. The photo, the image, the everything, the sensationalism, everything that's going on. If there was anybody that didn't convict these 4 on any kind of charges, you would see everything go to hell. And I firmly believe that. There has to be justice one way or the other. There has to be justice in this situation.
So, Mel, tell me, how does a guy like Derek Chauvin continue to work knowing that he's had 18 complaints? That, to me, goes beyond my wildest of imagination, and that'll lead me to my next question. 18 complaints.
Protected, obviously. I mean, he's killed somebody before, too,
right.
Questionable shooting. So, he's protected, and because of all that, because of being written up all those times, killing somebody before, nothing ever happened to him, and he felt he was tested upon bulletproof. I mean, you could tell. Right. Just by the way he was casually sitting there with his knee on his neck and depriving Mr. Floyd of air. He knew he was going to be okay. When the dust settled, that he would be fine. Okay, he might have to sit on the desk for a little while IA investigates, but he'll be back out on the street in a certain amount of time. He'll be at home watching Netflix, whatever he wants to watch on TV. He never thought that he was going to have to spend he didn't think he was going to spend 1 hour in a jail cell. I can guarantee you that. Never crossed his mind that he would spend an hour in a jail cell, let alone possibly 40 years.
True. So with that said, okay, Mel, do you believe in the death penalty since Minnesota doesn't have it?
The death penalty is not a deterrent, and then in this country, because we have so many wrongful convictions, people sitting on death row that did not commit the crimes. No, I don't. Number one, it's not a deterrent because it takes too long to carry it out, and because our justice system is not fair. Our justice system is skewed for the wealthy. And unfortunately, injustice is colorblind. Poor people don't have an opportunity in our justice system. Not just minorities in a different way, but poor people. It discriminates against poor people as well because you don't get the right type of representation. You go in there and you just, they're usually not as educated and not as sophisticated, and when they find themselves in front of a judge, everything gets tossed at them. They throw the book at them with all kind of charges, and they end up taking them. But in the cases of death penalty cases, because of the way that we deal with death penalty, as far as all the appeals and so forth and so on, it's not swift. It's not a deterrent. Murders haven't gone down because we have the death penalty.
That's true.
It's not a deterrent. And when you don't value life anyway, you don't value somebody else's life, you surely don't care about your own.
Well, you're right, Bill. These do linger on. So with that said, okay, whether the death penalty ever occurs here, my prediction, and I think it's probably a pretty obvious one, that the inmates will take care of them instead.
Well, a lot of those people don't do well in prison, for whatever reason. They never would find themselves in that type of situation. I mean, prison is not easy. I mean, it's not Now, it's not a trip to Disneyland, and it's not meant to be easy. I mean, it deprives you, it strips you of being a human being.
Right.
It makes you feel much less than a human being because you're in a cage.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're told what to do, when to do, and how to do it. It's not a pleasant experience.
Yeah, without
It's
a
going to be
doubt.
extremely difficult for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, being a police officer, who's to say a lot of the inmates won't have it in for a police officer as well? There's a lot of variables involved that I don't care if
And
you
being a
want.
dirty police officer is not good.
Oh, no, that's
Nope.
true. That's true.
We had this discussion. Yesterday. What do you call it? When we talk, when we have pre-meeting. I'm sorry. I drew a blank. I'm sorry. I was listening to you guys.
That's
and I
all
couldn't
right.
formulate the word.
I mean,
But
That's right.
we
It's
discussed
production
that too.
meeting.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, pre-production. Thank you.
There you
I
go.
appreciate
Hey,
that.
Mel's getting the jingle here, man. But yeah, let me, before you say that,
Well, I
David,
appreciate it. Mel for the save.
let me say this, David. Okay, Mel, I do believe in the death penalty heavily now, but again, the downside is how long does it take for it to get carried out? I mean, so I'm with you all the way. Tax dollars and all that. Go ahead, David. I want to slip that in.
And it's not a deterrent. No, I have a degree in criminal justice that I don't use. I'm sure my mother is thrilled that I'm actually talking about legal stuff on the radio right now. But it's not a deterrent. If they loaded Sparky up to the back of a car and did public executions, it still wouldn't be a deterrent because the process is still too long. It doesn't change the narrative. So it's a failed or a flawed system. I don't want to say it's failed, but it is flawed in how it's in how it's used.
Well, in some country it is a deterrent, because it's swift. Right after, right after the punishment, right after you're found guilty or whatever, punishment is carried out. You don't get any time to think about it or anything like that. It's swift and it's out there for everybody to see it. And, that's how they keep people in line in some countries. We're not going to do that here. And understandably so. But that type of punishment during slavery, they did that to keep the slaves in line. As the numbers grew, as the slave numbers grew, to keep that large group in check, they might have to, a runaway slave, they're going to catch that runaway slave, and then they're going to make an example out of him in front of the rest of the slaves so that the rest of them understand this is what the punishment is if you decide to do that, to keep them in check. So it works when it's swift. But again, because our justice system, the way that it is not fair. I'm not a proponent of them. Now, when I was younger, I'm all death penalty guy. Let me be the guy to pull the switch, man. I do them two at a time. Come on, But the older you get, your things change, and you look at the world a lot differently. And I see different injustices happening all the time, and this is white and black folks. I mean, there are people on death row right now that are innocent, and we've seen this over and over and over again, where people have been sitting on death row and have been convicted of a crime they didn't commit. And these guys are on death row, and so I don't believe in that. And again, like I said, it's not a deterrent, not the way it's set up in our system.
Right. The one thing I could say about the Minneapolis incident, though, and I think we've alluded to this all along, is you're right, Mel, all this built up for a long time, and I think the Minneapolis incident here was what I consider the straw that broke the camel's back. It really was. And that's why it finally came to a head, much less the fact that Derek Chauvin leaned on his neck and ultimately killed him. I mean, because there's lots of ways to pass away, but that was as ugly as it gets, and ugly and obvious. By the way, folks, you're listening to No Limits on WSAN Network. My name is Scott Morgan. We're at the Motor City Mad Mouth, along with Mel Farr Jr. and David Levin. We're talking about the tragedy of George Floyd that occurred on May 25th. So, but, Mel, would you say that this was a straw that broke the camel's back?
Yeah, again, because I just think that it was so blatant. I mean, look, prior to this happening, the big talk every single day on CNN was the coronavirus for the last 2 months or longer, however that's been going on. Now, the coronavirus is taking a back seat to this because any decent human being is appalled by what they saw on television. And then you had the protests that came after it. And then obviously some of those protests turned violent, one way or the other. There's a lot of looting in the beginning of the protests, no question about it. But, there's no question about it. This here seems to be, and I'm being very optimistic that it seems that we're opening a dialogue. And, I don't post much on Facebook, and I was telling you about this the other day, Scott, and I definitely don't get political on Facebook because 50% of the time you're going to be wrong. So you're just going to spend your time arguing with
them. Yeah.
50% of the time somebody's going to feel that you're wrong. Because, when you look at our elections, it's about 50-50, 49-51, one way or the other. So you're going to have a problem with 50% of your friends on Facebook. And so I try not to get political on Facebook. Now, the last time I really got into something on Facebook was the whole Colin Kaepernick knee thing because it got on my nerves hearing people talk about the flag all the time.
Right.
And like I was telling you yesterday, Scott, we just, as African Americans, just got comfortable underneath this flag because under the same flag, we had to deal with all these other atrocities. Slavery was founded under this flag, okay?
Right.
Segregation was under this flag. Jim Crow was under this flag. We were being lynched under this flag. All those things happened under this flag. So we're just kind of getting comfortable with this flag, and you want to make his protest to be about the flag.
Right.
When it was never about the flag.
Right. No, I'm with you.
Very clear, but the media and everybody else, what they do, those in power, the oppressor wanted to change the narrative. And that's how the guy ended up being ostracized.
All right.
Lost his livelihood.
You're talking about Colin Kaepernick, so I want to go out there and mention it a little bit more today. Pete Carroll said he had the highest praise for Colin Kaepernick, yet he wouldn't sign him. What's your interpretation of that one, Mel?
Yeah, that's all hot air. I don't. That's easy. That's raising its history to have highest respect for him right now.
Yeah, right.
It's easy to do. That's easy to do right now. Hell, Roger Goodell probably feels real good about him right now.
That's true.
The time to feel good about him is when he was standing or when he was kneeling. That was the time to say, "Hey, I put your arm around him. I stand with Cap." That was the time to stand with Cap. It's too late now.
So
it's easy to stand with him now.
So, do you think any NFL team would take a chance to sign him?
It doesn't really matter because at this point in time, everybody will see it for what it's worth.
Okay.
In the African American community, you didn't want to take a chance on him then. Why do you want to take a chance on him now? To try to get on the right side of history? It's too late to be on the right side of history.
Okay.
I think he can get an opportunity, but it's not going to have the same meaning that it could have had.
I agree.
The only way that it changes the narrative without that is that if he gets a chance, let's say some starter goes down and they sign him, then maybe the narrative changes, but then how much politics plays into that victory? And, it's a no-win situation. You're probably very right about it. But that's the only way I can see the narrative changes.
Yeah, there's no way. I can't think of a way that an NFL team can come out smelling like a rose by signing Colin Kaepernick right now. Because it's safe. He's safe now. Because everybody admits he was right. So he's safe. But when it was unpopular, nobody wanted to touch him. They wanted to distance themselves from him as much as possible. Now, look, there's 32 starting jobs in the NFL. Most teams carry at least one backup quarterback. So you're trying to tell me that Colin Kaepernick wasn't at least one of the 64 best quarterbacks in the league?
We had this conversation last night, and we said, because we both cover the Jaguars, that he's probably better than any of the quarterbacks on their roster right now. So.
Well, I think he's better than
the Bears too. The Bears. There's quite a few teams that he's better than who they have in place right now.
Oh yeah.
And when he left football, when he couldn't get signed, when San Francisco decided to cut ties with him. He was better than a lot of players, a lot of quarterbacks at that particular time.
No question about it. Oh, yeah. So we talked about the quarterback position, Mel, and now there's a firestorm surrounding Drew Brees where LeBron was on the attack, followed by others. What can you take out of what Brees should have or shouldn't have said?
I mean, at this point in time, if he's still, and it's like LeBron said, man, did you not hear what he said he was protesting?
Right.
It was never about the flag. And here he goes bringing in the flag. That infuriates people because that means you're not listening. So it's either you don't know or you don't want to know. And in Drew Brees' case, it's he don't want to know.
Right.
See, at this point in time, with black folks, it's not enough to say that I'm not a racist. Because if you're saying I'm not a racist, you're a part of the problem because that means you're standing on the sidelines and you're willing just to watch everything that's going on.
Right.
You're not an active participant. You have to be you're either a racist or you're anti-racist. That's what you have to be. You can't say I'm not racist. You either have to be just a blatant racist or you have to be against it. You have to make a choice. And I think that's what's happening now is people are coming off the fence and making a decision. Hey, I'm not, people are saying, that's not me. I don't like that. That doesn't sit right with me. That's not right. So they're making choices. You know what? I am anti that. Whatever that is that I saw on TV, that's not me. And I'm against that. That's what I think you're finding that's happening in people right now. They're having to. I think people are having I guess, kind of an awakening right now.
Oh, yeah. No doubt about it. I mean, you're flooded with it on every news outlet on the planet. And for that matter, when ESPN starts talking about it, every one of their programs is getting into it, much less during a time when you have COVID-19 where there isn't anything going on and they're scrambling to put stuff on the air, then you know full well that this is definitely an issue that obviously goes wider than just the field of play, but news-wise as well, without a doubt. Now, I know David had a couple of interesting questions. I'm going to go over some of the ones that he went ahead. And David, you can step in if you want to.
No, go ahead.
Will the NBA or NFL players step up and help quell the peace with these riots?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Sure. Will the NBA or NFL players step up and help quell the peace of these riots?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of them have. I mean, I don't think anybody wants violence because generally when you have violence, we get hurt. We don't have a military. We can't call in a military. We don't have that. So we understand that. And again, like I said, I mean, I think there's some outside influences, some agitators or something like that came in and took advantage of the situation to make a point for themselves. I think the vast majority, but obviously, because the media likes to sensationalize things, obviously what's going to get the headlines is all the looting and the rioting. But I think the vast majority of people want to and have been peacefully protesting. And I think all the athletes are for that. I mean, some athletes have been involved in some of the protests. Clay and Steph were involved in protesting. A guy for the Boston Celtics that went to school down here, Jaylen Brown, he came down here. He drove down here.
Yeah, 15 hours.
Protest down here in Atlanta. I mean, athletes are getting involved in the protest. I mean, they've always, well, I shouldn't say they always, but this generation here of athletes have been very vocal, particularly the basketball players, because with David Stern and the guy that's in charge right now,
Adam Silver,
right? They've allowed their players the ability to speak their mind, right? And they back their players, and they have some very sharp guys that are very socially conscious. LeBron is a very socially conscious individual. Steph's a very socially conscious individual. They have some guys that, Chris Paul, they have good leadership in the NFL. I mean, in the NBA, and it's not really divided. They're all pretty. They're united, pretty much in their voice. Whereas the NFL, you have different voices. Then not everybody's united. Obviously, as you see with Drew Brees' comment today, he doesn't get it. And the thing that's really bothered me about it is I haven't heard much from the NFL owners about this. I haven't heard any. Mark Davis put a statement out, but Jerry Jones, he loves the limelight. I mean, anytime he gets a chance to say something. Pardon me?
Shad Khan today put out a wonderfully written piece about how this has to stop.
I mentioned that yesterday to Scott because I was surprised that he hadn't said anything because,
Well, you've got to read it. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm saying, he's a part of the good old boy club, but, he doesn't look like the rest of them.
No, he put out something today talking about how it's this has to end because not only is it going to hurt now, it's going to hurt in the future. And all it's doing is destroying everything that they're trying that is being built. I would recommend you read it. It says what it should say.
I'll get you the transcript, Mel.
I will, because I was surprised that he didn't come out and say something.
Right.
Being that he's an ethnic minority, I was surprised that at least he hadn't said anything. But of course, Jerry Jones, I'm really surprised he hadn't said anything. He hadn't said a word. He's been quiet as a church mouse.
Yeah, I'll get you that transcript, Mel.
So they were very vocal on the other side. Jerry Jones was very vocal about his players taking a knee, and he dictated and controlled all of that. They all went out there, did whatever they did, took a knee together, whatever it was before the national anthem was saying, and he said his players would not be taking a knee. He was very definitive in his stance.
Well,
about that protest.
How surprised were you that actually Michael Jordan said something? Because Michael Jordan never says anything.
Again, it gets to a point where even a great like Michael Jordan, who has stayed away from it, and I understand why he did stay away from it.
Right.
Has to speak out, and then he's in a different position now than where he was as a player, as an owner, and as he had to say something. I mean, it was his duty to say something, and I think the people were looking for him to say something. And then obviously because it was just so blatantly in your face, disgusting, that he had to say it. And he said, "I'm tired of being quiet." So he said something because a lot of times as an African American saying something, it could put you in a very precarious situation. I mean, you look at what happened to Ali when he voiced his opinion. They stripped him of his livelihood. And a lot of people felt the same way that he did. He just had the guts to stand up for it.
Right, he had the stone to say it.
Well, let's stay out of the NFL, Mel.
And he denied entry into the war. Man, I'm not going over there.
Oh, yeah. Remember that.
Right.
Real well. Mel, let's stay in the NFL. I know another guy who had to backtrack a bit was Vic Fangio, the head coach of the Denver Broncos. Were you able to get any read into what he did or initially versus the fact that he had to backtrack a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, he needs to take off those rose-tinted glasses that he has on because I don't know what NFL he's been in. Yeah. Now, maybe he hasn't seen any racism himself because he hasn't had to deal with it.
Right.
Man, all he had to do is open up his eyes and look all around him, and racism exists all around the NFL. I don't know what NFL he coaches in, and I haven't seen the backtrack of that statement.
Right.
But I mean, I posted something about it, and I know a lot of players have posted things about it. They don't know what he's talking about.
I couldn't figure it out either.
I don't know what he thought he could accomplish by making that statement, or what he was hoping to accomplish.
Well, in the eyes of many, nothing. So I want to get to the big question afterwards. We'll go over a couple of interesting points. We'll go back to Colin Kaepernick, but again, because obviously he's a focal point of our broadcast tonight, the need to understand Colin Kaepernick, would you say that was the tip of the iceberg?
The tip of the iceberg for what?
Well, I mean, in terms of this firestorm we have, we're trying to understand him, and now was this the tip of the iceberg? David, clarify what you were looking to get out of that when you brought this up.
Meaning, like, Now that we know, let me just make sure I said this correctly, guys, because I'm on radio. Now that we know that Kaepernick's statement holds true, and that people are now looking back and saying, "Oh, he was right." Was that the jump off mark, or the jump off spot where we say, "Okay, he's right," and now everything else that's been going on after him, it's a direct reflection of it, and we were wrong all along by not jumping on the bandwagon or jumping behind support and putting an end to it then, so it's not as atrocious as it is now?
Well, I just think that for whatever reason, people were most disgusted with what they saw this former police officer do to this man while handcuffed, mind you, right? Not resisting in any way, shape, form, or fashion, actually only fighting to get some air. And I think that people, and it's just ironic that the image is of him kneeling. So obviously you're going to draw that comparison to Colin Kaepernick taking a knee. That's the easy thing to do, especially because people were so outraged with what Colin Kaepernick did when he was trying to tell people that this was a problem. What we're seeing. So, because for a long time people said, "Oh, it's not that bad. No, racism doesn't exist. There's no racism. Everything's equal." All this other kind of stuff. Where when you're not black, how can you tell me what I feel when you've never woke up a day being a person of color? Every day I wake up the same way. I wake up a person of color. And I was telling Scott this. I think I was telling him the other day. And I was having this conversation with somebody, and I told him the name of the person. And I won't mention it here, but it's possible. I went to the same high school and the same college as an individual. And the reason why I bring this up is because we're having this conversation about Colin Kaepernick and him kneeling, and what the flag means to him versus what the flag means to me, and why I'm not upset. Why I'm talking about what Colin Kaepernick is standing for when he's kneeling versus you talking about him disrespecting the flag. I said, do you understand? There's two Americas. You don't understand. There's one America for you and one America for me. Can you believe that your experience in high school and college was different from my experience in college, in high school and college? And we went to the same high school and the same college? Do you believe that my experience was different than yours? I just shared with you a couple of experiences that I had just driving while black. And that was my only crime.
Right.
One of the times I wasn't even driving. I'm just coming out to 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I just think that people of all races, colors, creeds, religion were so appalled by this that they had to make a decision, or that they searched their souls and they made a decision that whatever that is, I'm not with that.
Right.
Well, they simply had enough. So
I don't like that, and that's not right.
So Mel, with that,
I think what you're seeing is the goodness of America come out.
Oh yeah. With that said, what can we learn from what we have seen so far with the riots and the racial unrest? And I have one other important point we have to get to before we end the broadcast.
Well, I mean, obviously we got to learn. We got a long ways to go. I mean, we have to. Like I said, we have to totally dismantle the justice system that we have in place right now and build it up again, because it's not broken. It's working exactly the way that it was designed to work. So we have to totally demolish the justice system the way that it is currently, the way it's constructed currently, and rebuild a new justice system that's fair for all people. And we need to start having real dialogue. And first thing is, people have to exercise some certain rights. I mean, we have to exercise our right to vote. If you don't like something, we need to vote that particular person out. We don't like a prosecutor because they sent Pookie to jail. We thought his sentence was unfair. We need to plot. We need to plan. We need to organize. We need to strategize. We need to mobilize so that we can get that particular prosecutor out and get somebody that we feel is going to be more just. So we need to exercise certain rights. We need to exercise our right to vote. That's the first thing that we need to do so we can get some people in there that are going to give us a chance. But a lot of this stuff is not going to happen on the federal level. A lot of this stuff has to happen at the local level. There's going to be some things that we need from the federal level to support the people at the local level, but we need to start it right here in our communities. Get involved with our police departments. Figure out ways in which we can do better policing, number one. And then, like I said, make sure we vote in the right kind of people in our judicial system in the local level, and make sure we get involved. We're not just voting for the president. We vote all the way down the ballot. Vote for everybody, and make sure you know who you're voting for.
Right. Now,
just don't vote for somebody because of name recognition. Vote for the person that you feel is going to do the best job for you.
Mel, you have strong Los Angeles ties, so maybe I should throw this at you. I remember a long time ago, and David's a baseball writer, so there was no better person to have on here than him to talk about it. I remember, obviously, the Dodgers broke the color barrier with Jackie Robinson. That was a huge part of baseball, let alone American history. But by the same token, that organization had Al Campanis, and I got to know Al Campanis at the 1981 baseball winter meetings. Did you ever see that Nightline broadcast with Ted Koppel where Al Campanis stated that he didn't feel that African Americans were suited to be major league managers? Are you aware of that at all?
No, but it doesn't surprise me. I mean, we had the same problem in the NFL.
Right.
Black athlete couldn't play quarterback. Black athlete couldn't play middle linebacker.
Right.
Black athlete couldn't play safety because we weren't smart enough to do it. And God forbid, a coach. How long did it take for us to get a coach? I mean, we got Art Shell here in the modern era.
You have 9.4% of the NFL coaches right now are African American. That's terrible.
Yeah, it is.
And how many players are there? I mean, players make up 75%, 80%. I don't know what the number is, but I mean, the majority of the players are African American. So, you're telling me the guys that played the game, they can't coach it?
Good point.
They can't manage it. They can't be in the front office. They can't scout talent. They can't evaluate talent. They can't run a franchise. So, I mean, those are problems that are going to have to be dealt with. That the NFL is going to have to deal with the NFLPA, and they're going to have to work through those things because obviously nobody, you have to understand, the people in power don't want to give up their power. They don't want to give up their power.
Well,
so there's a fear involved. There's a fear factor involved.
The backlash, Mel, off that Ted Koppel Nightline interview was Campanis lost his job after 41 years with the organization, and obviously the Dodgers were certainly ahead of the curve when it came to bring on a minority player. And yet I know Ted Koppel gave him every opportunity to get out of it, and Al continued to hang himself as the interview went on, and obviously it led to what it did. The reason why I'm bringing that up, Mel and David, is it's leading to my big point of the night. All right. Sacramento Kings longtime announcer Grant Napier resigned on Tuesday based on a string of tweets with DeMarcus Cousins where he talks about all lives matter, and he's a play-by-play announcer for the Kings since 1988. So the question is, and this is a delicate balance, we always talk about the fact that we all know that all lives matter, but we also can't lose sight of the big picture that black lives matter. So I guess in reference to what Napier was saying, he says, if it was dumb, I apologize. That wasn't his intent. And, of course, I don't know whether his track record helps him out because he backed Donald Sterling, the former L.A. Clippers owner, and Adam Silver ran Sterling out of the league. So let's talk about both of those phrases and put them in their perspective. And we talked about this, Mel, yesterday. We both know that all lives matter, and that shouldn't be a negative, but we have to look at the way this country is flawed back to the Civil War, that black lives indeed do matter, and I think this thing has been underestimated, and now it's been brought to the forefront. Mel, the floor is yours on this one, and then David and I will get involved, but I want to get your perspective on both of those, all lives matter and black lives matter. And then talk about Napier losing his job after 32 years.
Yeah, well, I think, a lot of that came about when the Black Lives Matter movement came about. A lot of people were talking about all lives matter and to try to diminish what that movement was all about. And so, yeah, it's a sensitive subject because from our perspective, see, and you got to look at it from our perspective because our perception is our reality. And our perception is our lives don't matter based on what we're seeing. And not only do they not matter, we can't get justice when something happens to us. We can't get justice through our judicial system when something happens to us like this. So to say something like that, we all understand that our lives matter. But we want to emphasize that in that there's a segment or subtitle that Black Lives Matter. And we want you to understand that. And we want you to respect that. And we want you to go out and do something about it. So again, him saying that, because that was something that people were saying, when this whole movement started, it's like what Drew Brees came out and said. Why did you say it? What do you hope to accomplish by saying it at this point in time? If that's how you feel, okay, that's your right to feel that way. But at the same time, to me, it just shows an ignorance, an unwillingness to want to try to understand somebody else's point of view. That only your point of view matters, and that's it. Right. I don't want to listen to anything that you have to say. That's how I feel about that.
Yeah,
he's just being so arrogant in referring to Drew Brees in this particular case, and it's obviously this guy here. He's being so arrogant that my point of view is the only point of view that matters. Your point of view does not.
And that's where he's out of line. There's no question that all lives matter, but in the end, Black lives matter. And let's not lose sight of another bigger picture here, too, Mel. When in the military, when we go to war, let's not lose sight of the fact that we have African Americans and Caucasian white people on the same team. So that means Black lives matter because they're alongside of us. We're working together to fight the same cause, and that's where we have to be united in that front, which reinforces what you've even said. David Whittier, you want to add to this?
I'm going to be very brief about it because Mel hit a lot of the points that I think too. It's important to remember that we're all wanting to be heard, but at the same time, African Americans have been talking about this for years. They're a segment that is incredibly important to what this dialogue is, and sometimes just by saying one thing that blankets everything silences the small voice that's trying to be heard. I don't think I should say anything more because I'm not as educated about the situation as others are. It's a very important part of our culture. It's a very important part of our Americana. And by silencing it, by blanketing it, is, making it more of a problem.
Anything else you want to add to that, Mel?
No. Well, I mean, it's just, when in policing have you seen a white person get killed over passing a counterfeit $20 bill?
Right.
I've seen things on TV. I mean, the guy, the Boston Massacre, the guy that set the bombs out there for the Boston Marathon.
Right.
He was apprehended peacefully. The Unabomber. He was apprehended peacefully. I mean, there's a lot. The Columbine. I mean, the people who commit these. The guy that did the shooting in the church in South Carolina, I believe it was. He was apprehended peacefully.
Yeah, Dylan. That was what I was going to say was the kid was apprehended peacefully and was detained peacefully.
Wasn't injured.
Completely. Sorry?
Wasn't bruised up. He wasn't injured. He wasn't bruised up.
Nope.
This guy passed a counterfeit $20 bill and gets killed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absurd. It's absurd.
It is.
Well, one thing
when you say all lives matter, you're totally ignoring what everybody's talking about. You're just turning a deaf ear to what everybody's talking about because you just don't want to listen.
Right.
You just have an unwillingness to listen.
Right. The only way that these two can go hand in hand is they have to be referenced hand in hand that yes, indeed, all lives matter, but Black lives matter as well. That they represent a part of this population, and a good part of it here in the United States. I think the last I heard, Mel, correct me on the numbers, was 15 or 16%, and you have like 60, 65% are Caucasian, the rest are, I guess the rest are, represent the other. But regardless, that's still a large portion of a population of millions and millions or whatever we have here. So, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, you have to look at the phrases simultaneously. You can't single one of them out. Yeah, while all lives matter is true, Black lives matter. And again, you have the left hand and the right hand, if that makes any sense. You can't de-emphasize the importance on both of them, especially since Black lives obviously are, they've unfortunately been on the wrong side of the coin too many times. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, people have to take Black Lives Matter.
Hand, we're trying to play our hand.
Yeah, people have to really take Black Lives Matter seriously. It is, because if you don't, unfortunately, these incidents aren't going to stop. And unfortunately, what we saw in Minnesota can get a whole lot worse the next time. There's no question about that. And I think this is the ultimate wake-up call. And for those individuals that really want a good feeling of Black history, I would strongly encourage them to go to Mel's neck of the woods and visit the King Center in Atlanta. I was there many years ago when I was covering an NFL game with the Falcons and also a Braves game at Fulton County Stadium and at the Georgia Dome, and I took some time and really enjoyed my experience there. That should be a bucket list to appreciate everything that Dr. Martin Luther King stood for and his wife, Coretta King. They're just sensational people, and God bless them. And you know what, I can't forget Rosa Parks either, huh, Mel? Because she was a big part of a lot of what you talked about.
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, she's the one that started the boycott, the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. If it wasn't for Dr. King and his efforts, obviously, Black people wouldn't be where they are today. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be in the positions that they are in today if it wasn't for his sacrifice and his willingness to go up against the establishment and demand rights for people of color, for Black people.
Yeah, I mean, this is what it's all about, folks. We could talk about this for hours and hours. You'd probably get that on CNN and Fox. What we're trying to do is give you a simplistic approach. And let's not lose sight of the one thing that I really think is important, is that we're paying tribute to George Floyd, without a doubt. Here's a man here that his life was taken away from him. And I'm actually happy to see Steven Jackson step up a little bit. And he's already gone on record that he'll do anything for his daughter and help support him. And there's a lot of people that will step up here. But it is unfortunate that we have that COVID-19, and now we have this. This is a back-to-back blow. And we can only hope that this does get better. Because if we can't look at the big picture, then who are we? You know what I mean? I hope that puts everything in perspective for you guys. What about you, Mel?
Yeah, I mean, there's nobody, unfortunately she can't get her dad back. Everybody can say they'll step in and do this and do that, but, you only get one dad. You only get one mom, you only get one dad. That child only gets one dad, and unfortunately, she'll never have the opportunity to grow up knowing her dad, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it really is. By the way, tomorrow night on the Sports Exchange, Mel Farr is kind enough to join us again with Rick Curdy, and it's neat now we had Rick on last night with David, so we have our nice little panel here talking about a very, very tough situation, but we're not going to dodge it, and we're really happy that on our first edition of No Limits that we're able to bring everything to the forefront, and hope we've given everybody out there an opportunity to listen to our perspectives, draw your own conclusions. Mel, is there anything else you want to add before we get to how people can contact you?
No, sir. I think we covered it.
What about you, David?
I think we hit a solid home run. This has been an eye-opening experience. Like I said last night, I know, Mel, you weren't part of the program. We talk sports on so many different levels about great things and controversy, and that's what our platform usually is. this is a different experience for me, and I'm really glad that I'm able to share, the radio with you guys talking about this.
Well, go ahead, Mel.
No, I was going to say I appreciate, having the interaction and the dialogue with you, David, and I look forward to doing more of these things in the future. It's unfortunate that it is under these types of this circumstance, but I think it's important that we do have the conversation about it, so that hopefully this dialogue will continue in the living rooms of the people that are listening.
Well, the South Florida Tribune podcast is a local broadcast for a lot of our local people, and that's one of the reasons why I created No Limits, so that it brings a national perspective to what we're trying to do. And I am so happy that we've been able to bring that out there to the forefront here. All right, with that said, Mel, why don't you go ahead and let people know how they can get a hold of you, and if they want to get to Atlanta and they want to check out the King Center, you ought to take them to the Big Chicken. You got to take them there. A big classic. We had an opportunity to meet you over there, and I have some pictures of the ages with you, and it was a lot of fun out there in Atlanta with you. And of course, I look forward to getting back out there soon, and we can expand past the Big Chicken. But let everybody know how they can go hold of you, Mel.
Yeah, on any social media site, you can get a hold of me at Mel Farr Jr. My email, you can catch me at melfarjr@gmail.com. We also have a website for our foundation, and that is, you can follow what we're doing with our foundation at it's melfar.org. So again, my email, melfarjr@gmail.com, and any social media site at Mel Farr Jr. You can follow me, ask any questions, weigh in on any conversations that I may be having on social media, which I rarely do interact on social media, but this here was important. I want to be able to do my part in this, not only for myself, for my kids, my grandkids, and obviously my grandkids' kids. I think this is really, really important. We're at a crossroads right now in America, and the direction that what happens here in the next 6 months is going to be critical as to how things are going to be for the rest of my life and my children's life and my children's children's life. So, this is important. So that's the only reason why at this particular time I've been doing some things on social media. Yeah,
and let's not lose sight of the fact, Mel, that you do some incredible work that we promoted on our website, southfloridatribune.com. And folks, if you want to know a little bit more about Mel Farr, all you need to do is go to southfloridatribune.com, and we have a profile that's on there, and he'll obviously keep that profile until I stop breathing and then some. So you can learn a little bit more about Mel on southfloridatribune.com. So, you do some great work with the youth, both in, I believe, Atlanta and the Metro Detroit area. I want to make sure that we get that out there. David, why don't you let everybody know how they can get a hold of you, and then we'll save me for last.
Sure. I can be found on fansided.com. I cover the Jacksonville Jaguars on blackandteal.com, and I cover the Miami Marlins on marlinmaniac.com. If you want to check me out on Twitter, I'm at DM719907, and Scott and I are co-hosts of 108 Stitches here on the network.
And as for my information, you can reach me on Twitter at Tribune South. Facebook, we have a South Florida Tribune page as well. Instagram, South Florida Tribune. We have a YouTube channel. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has set it back a little. I haven't been able to do any videos. But that's South Florida Tribune. We encourage you to follow that. And as I alluded to moments ago, our website, www.southfloridatribune.com. All of our broadcasts can be found on there on the specified shows, which I'm about to get to in a moment. You can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And my LinkedIn, you can reach me, Scott Morganroth. The shows on the network, on the WSAN network, include the Sports Exchange, the South Florida Tribune podcast, 108 Stitches Baseball Talk with David and myself, The Real and the Rare with Xavier McKnight, Fantasy Football, myself and Ryan Schoolrood, Motorman and Rude Dog. And you know it, here it's No Limits. And so you can find all of our broadcasts here. This broadcast will be on the southfloridatribune.com website. Feel free to listen to it, and I'll make sure it gets on social media as well. Guys, you did a fantastic job. I'm extremely proud of both of you. This was not an easy thing to talk about. We know it, but I want to make sure that we did everything that we could to touch every single base, and I hope that we've accomplished that objective, Mel.
I believe we did.
What about you, David?
We did. I'm glad we were able to do this. Thank you so much.
All right, so, just so you know, No Limits will be heard every Wednesday night here on the WSAN network, and I guarantee you, guys, the subjects will get easier than this, what we had to start off with this particular one. They will get easier, but you have to do what you've got to do, and I'm proud that we accomplished our objective for sure. So, on behalf of Mel Farr Jr. and David Levin, my name is Scott Morganroth, wishing you a good night, and thanks for joining us here on the WSAN network. No Limits. Good night.
Good night.